you can see that there are bullet marks still in the building left there from the Easter Rising. Well, people often ask me who was the most important revolutionary in Ireland at the time. I would always say Tom Clark. So here then, this is the front door where they came charging in 1916. But James Connolly shouted, "Everybody out! We've declared a republic." Countess Markievicz was here. She shouted, "3 cheers for Jim Larkin," and a policeman smacked her in the face. The very famous spire in Dublin that went up in the year 2003. Now, what was there before? Only Nelson's pillar, a symbol of British imperialism. So behind me here is the rotunda where the Irish Volunteers were founded in 1913. There's a lovely phrase in 3 languages on Jim Larkin's statue on O'Connell Street. It's in French, and it's in Gaeilge, and it's in the English as well. The reason why it's in French is the originator of the phrase was a French revolutionary, Camille Desmoulins. But in English, the great appear great because we are on our knees, let us rise. Now, Jim Larkin appeared in the window of the Imperial Hotel here on the 31st of August 1913, a day to become known as Labour's Bloody Sunday. The police arrested him, dragged him out on the streets, and Countess Markievicz was here. She shouted, "3 cheers for Jim Larkin," and a policeman smacked her in the face, and all hell broke loose, and the cops battered everybody up and down this street. And in the weekend of violence, 3 people were murdered by the police, and that's why Jim Larkin and James Connolly founded the Irish Citizen Army to defend the workers and the strikers against the brutality of the police. So behind me is the very famous spire in Dublin that went up in the year 2003. Now, what was there before? Only Nelson's pillar, a symbol of British imperialism. And it was a good man, Liam Sutcliffe, who put the bomb on the top of Nelson's pillar in March 1966 and blew Nelson sky high. Good luck and good riddance to that symbol. But of course, we awarded the prize for the replacement of Nelson's pillar to a London firm of architects, Ian Ritchie Architects, but it got the best nicknames: the Stiletto in the Ghetto, the Nail in the Pail, the Rod to God. A few rude ones, you'll have to forgive me: the Stiffy by the Liffey, the Erection at the Intersection, and the Phallus at the Palace as well. So here we are at the General Post Office, which was the headquarters in Easter week 1916. And very famously, you can see that there are bullet marks still in the building left there from the Easter Rising. Now, it's fairer to say that a lot of those might be from the 18-pounders, which were big cannons that had 360 lead balls in the top, and they'd explode in midair and rain down on top of you. So these are very interesting because they fit very well into the holes here, which would suggest that a lot of the bullet holes are actually from the 18-pounders. And the scientific term Occam's razor applies here. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's most likely a duck. So sometimes the simplest answer is the truth. And it looks very good. It looks very well the way they fit in the holes there quite easily. These are very interesting. A friend of mine, Ben, dived down to the Odd shipwreck in Cove Harbour, and he brought me up some of these. These are Mosin Nagant, which are Russian rounds from the Battle of Tannenberg in August 1914. The Germans beat the Russians, took all their weapons, stored them in Hamburg, then gave them to Roger Casement, who had them loaded on board the Odd. Casement himself came to Ireland on a submarine, but he sent the shipment to land off the coast of Kerry, hopefully on Easter Sunday 1916. However, The shipment arrived a few days early and was captured by the British and forced to sail into Cove Harbour. Karl Spinder, the German captain, scuttled his ship, and down to the bottom of the sea went all the weapons for the uprising. I like this one because it gives you an indicator of how rotted it was from being down the bottom of the sea for so long. These are the ones that we used in 1916. They're for the Mauser 71 that were brought in on the Asgard in July 1914 by Erskine Childers and his lovely wife Molly Childers. They're slightly illegal because that's a dum-dum bullet and it makes a nice neat hole in your head, but sadly it blows the back of your head off. So unfortunately we did use these, but we were left with little choice, as some fellas had no weapons at all. Some fellas came out with a pike, a stick with a blade on the top. A great weapon in 1798, but not a great weapon for 1916. So here then, this is the front door where they came charging in 1916. You would have had James Connolly and Patrick Henry Pearce and Joseph Plunkett and Michael Collins as well, because Joe Plunkett had an aide de camp, which was Michael Collins, and they also had Tom Clark and Sean McDermott here. Now, two of the signatories who went to other positions, Tomás McDonough was in Jacob's Biscuit Factory, and Eamon Keant was in the South Dublin Union. But James Connolly shouted, "Everybody out! We've declared a republic." And you can imagine people turn around and go, "What the bloomin' hell?" A lot of women here getting separation allowance from the British Army. And they would have been very annoyed that their money was now being disrupted, right? Because they needed that money. People lived from hand to mouth. 18 shillings, if I remember, was the amount you got paid per week if your husband was in the trenches, and you got 3 more shillings for every child that you had. But your week's rent for a substandard one-room tenement was about 20 shillings. So you were at least getting your rent from the British Army. So if there's a fella standing here going, "You're free, we're freeing you," you'd be going, "Yeah, whatever. I want my money. Like, that's what I need." So it's understandable that a lot of people engaged in looting during the uprising as well, when they had so little. Children were going around with no shoes on their feet. They had empty bellies all day long, and they're wearing rags as well. And this can be a cold city in November and December, so I understand why people engaged in looting. So on Thursday, James Connolly was outside at about 1 o'clock, and he took a shot to the shoulder and a shot to the ankle. And this is why I've always loved James Connolly, because he's a general, he's our general, but he's out at the front line with the lads. And where were all your generals in World War I? They were all 40 miles behind the front line, and our James Connolly was out the front, and he took 2 wounds to his body, as I say, and he lay in a bed here, which they stole from the hotel next door, but he continued to give orders. You do this, you do the other, keeping the morale as best as he could. But on Friday, they had to evacuate the building, and of course that was led by O'Rahilly first, Michael Joseph O'Rahilly, a great Kerry man who had driven around Ireland stopping the uprising, but he joined in anyway. And O'Rahilly led 23 men down Mur Street against a machine gun, and he was shot to bits, and he wrote a little note to his wife to tell her what had happened. "Darling Nancy, I've just been shot leading a rush up Mur Street. I took refuge in a doorway. While I was there, I heard the men pointing out where I was." He means the machine gunner. "So I made a bolt for the lane I am in now. I got more than 1 bullet, I think. Tons and tons of love, dearie, to you and to Nell and to the boys and to Anna." And then he hits her with this lovely line, "It was a good fight anyhow. Lovingly yours, O'Rahilly. Please deliver this to Nanny O'Rahilly, 40 Herbert Park, Dublin. Goodbye, darling." So after the evacuation of the General Post Office, the revolutionaries occupied Mur Street and the whole area, specifically a terrace of buildings here. They spent one night, the leadership did, in number 10 Mur Street, and some of the lads tunnelled their way through the buildings by knocking holes in the adjoining walls, and then they made their way down to number 16 Mur Street, which is behind me, and there's a small plaque up there to commemorate that event. Elizabeth O'Farrell walked out of number 15 Mur Street with a white flag and walked down to the end of the street and said that General Pearse is ready to surrender to General Lowe. She was sent back to bring Pearse down to the barricade, and from then on, the GPO garrison was considered surrendered. So behind me here is the rotunda where the Irish Volunteers were founded in 1913. And that patch of grass over there was where the volunteers were held for one night after they surrendered. And there was a Captain Lee Wilson who was abusing the prisoners. He had a few drinks on him, and he stripped Tom Clark down, and he was abusing Sean McDermott. And a few of the lads said, someday we'll sort him out. And in June 1920, the IRA heard that Captain Lee Wilson was down in Gorey and he was now working with the police. So a few lads went down from Michael Collins' squad and they shot him. And to comfort his wife, there was a Jesuit who helped her spiritually. And in return, Maria was her name, she gave the Jesuits a very beautiful painting that she had bought in Scotland. And it hung in the Jesuit headquarters in Leeson Street for many years. And then one day, someone visited and said, Jesus, I think that's a Caravaggio. And sure enough, some art experts were called in and they discovered it was the lost Caravaggio, the Taking of the Christ, which is now hanging in our National Gallery. Well, people often ask me who was the most important revolutionary in Ireland at the time. I would always say Tom Clark. Tom spent 15 years in jail, being part of the bombing campaign in the 1880s over in England. And when he was released after an amnesty in the late 1890s, he went to America. He married a young lady over there from Limerick, Kathleen Daly, the niece of his old jail buddy, John Daly. But while they're in America, Tom and Kathleen, they lived in Brooklyn, but they became very good friends with the head of Clonnagail in the US, John Devoy. And when Tom returned in 1907, he had that great connection to the man with all the money in the US, Devoy. Now, he opened up two shops in Dublin. One was on Amiens Street, and this one behind me was on Parnell Street. So Tom Clark seemed like an innocent shopkeeper, but deep down, he's a physical force revolutionary planning to overthrow British rule in Ireland.